Hey, it's Scott Petrak, and welcome back to another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. I'm joined again by Dave Chudowsky of the WKYC Morning News. Dave, how are you doing?
Scott, I'm well. Tired a little bit. Not going to lie. Getting up at 2:30 a.m. This week. A lot going on, but you know what? Hey, we're fighters just like Browns fans. We get through it. But it's been fun. You have Cleveland in the spotlight with the NFL draft, and then over at Channel 3, Al Roker comes to town, then Lester Holt comes to town. So there's been a lot going on. It's really been cool to see Cleveland shine.
Oh, no doubt. I saw you hobnobbing with Al Roker. That's pretty cool. Taking all the sights, all the cool pictures. Yeah, it was cool.
He's a wild man. I'll tell you, I got to really be on your toes when you're working with him. But he's the real deal. What you see on TV is what you get in person. So it was pretty neat.
Well, that's good to hear.
How was vacation?
Yeah, it was good. Got away, went down to South Carolina for 5 or 6 days with wife and daughter and daughter's friend. We dodged we thought we might get rained out all week, but it wound up only being one day, and it wasn't even too bad. I was able to play golf 3 times and only missed one day of rookie minicamp. I was going to feel guilty, but we had a plan, and I wasn't even sure there was going to be a rookie minicamp. But the Browns only had one practice available to media, only one day of interviews. So I don't feel bad about that. And I actually have talked to a bunch of the draft picks, college coaches. So, I feel got a little bit of handle of that. I wrote about Greg Newsome II. I wrote about Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah earlier this week. Talked to his DC at Notre Dame, who's now the head coach at Vanderbilt. So maybe we get into that a little bit, just what he had to say about JOK. But it was good to get away. It had been more than a year, and I'm sure there's a bunch of people who have the same story. But it was nice to get away.
So what is going on with the Browns before we get into rookie camp? What's going on with them right now? They're in phase 2. Is that right?
Yeah. Phase 2 for the league started Monday. And for some teams that meant practice. The Browns were always going to be virtual this week. Their OTAs were scheduled to begin next week, right? So I think it's 3 weeks of OTAs leading into minicamp, which I'm looking at my calendar now, is supposed to be June 14th through 16th, I want to say, or 15th through 17th.
15 through 17 is what I have right now.
Yeah, Tuesday through Thursday. But J.C. Tretter, again this week, wrote a column for the NFLPA website, said his teammates are comfortable with what they're doing on their own. Most of the guys aren't going to go. So if there's not going to be a big player presence, I don't think the Browns are going to have practice. So, next week would be OTAs. It feels like it's still going to be virtual meetings, at least next week. And then I don't know if they're going to come to an agreement. Like some teams, the Colts and the Eagles, the players have reached an agreement with the teams about getting rid of minicamp, and they just have a limited number of really kind of low-key practices, or if the Browns will just stay virtual all off season, if they'll have guys in for walkthroughs for minicamp. It feels up in the air, but it's definitely not going to be a normal off-season program, and we might not have any Browns practices outside of the rookies, which, they went 11-5 last year without any practices either. And that's one of the things that J.C. Tretter keeps coming back to, right, is that they were able to have a successful season. The league had, higher points and closer games and fewer penalties. And I don't believe all that is necessarily connected to the fact that there was no offseason program, but I understand his argument. And, we might have touched upon this at some point, Dave, but I asked JC, it's kind of either right at the end of the year or right after the season. And, I said to him, you guys are always working out anyway, right? So what's the difference if you work out on your own or you work out with the team? And his point was, if I have to come back and start working out April 17th or whatever day you want to say is the start of the offseason program, then that means I have to start getting in shape 6 weeks before that or whatever it is, because I can't show up out of shape for my coaches. And he feels like that puts too much pressure on the players to not rest enough in the offseason. And I'm sure JC's working out. We see all the pictures and videos of Myles Garrett working out and Jarvis Landry, but it's on their own schedule. which is much different than a team mandated show up and be in good shape, number one. And then the second half of that is he's adamant that the offseason practices, while voluntary, have gotten to the point where coaches and organizations expect players to be there. And
I was just going to say that.
Right?
It's voluntary, wink, wink, right?
Right. I mean, remember what a big deal we made, and why I mean, the kind of collective media and maybe the fan base as well, when Odell wasn't at a lot of the offseason practices. Now,
Yes.
It was his first season, so you thought, okay, he needs to get acclimated. But the fact is, Odell is, like a global icon. He's got stuff to do. And I understand why fans turn their nose up and they're making all this money, but it is voluntary. And it had gotten to a point where I think players were looked at negatively if they didn't attend a good portion of the offseason program. That's one of JC's arguments. And then another is the practice had gotten too intense and too physical. And he talks about getting bull rushed. Forget the fact that they're not in pads. He was still getting bull rushed by nose tackles. And he just doesn't think that's a good idea for April and May and June. And for me, it's hard to argue with him because he knows his body better than I do. And if he's saying that and that the practices were too intense, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt there. Now, maybe there's a happy medium where you get the players in town for whatever it is, 2 or 3 weeks. You have walkthroughs. You do 7-on-7s. And it's not – and you can still do – you can still get work accomplished, but it's not the full-on 11-on-11 practices. And maybe that's kind of the happy medium where players feel respected. They feel like their bodies aren't being put in jeopardy, but the coaches still get guys on the field for however many practices it is.
Scott, the mandatory mini camp, June 15 to 17, is that something they're trying to get away from as well? The players, they don't want to do that. They want that to be virtual or non-existent and just show up at training camp. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what they want, Dave. Now, the problem is the mandatory minicamp has been collectively bargained, just like the voluntary practices, right? The voluntary offseason program was collectively bargained. And J.C. Treader will tell you that the league tried to make it mandatory offseason program, and the players fought them. And I think that was 2011. So, but they weren't able to, whether or not how hard they fought, I don't know, but there's still mandatory minicamp and you can be fined for not showing up. But I think the players say, well, what good is it to show up for 3 days, right? Like if everything else is virtual or we're going to boycott's not the right word, but if we're not going to show up, we're going to use our right not to show up. What's the point of 3 practices, right? Why don't we just wait until training camp? So I do think that's kind of a bargaining point. I don't think it's going to be changed this year. The question then becomes, does Kevin Stefanski in the Browns organization make the guys show up for those 3 days if they've skipped the rest of them? And I think we're going to have to see how that plays out.
So that leads me into this next question. Every article I read about this and trying to understand it, because it can be a little confusing.
Sure.
So my question is, do you think there's going to be any issues between coaches and players? And do you think some players will get upset if other players do go to voluntary stuff?
Yeah.
Do you think there'll be any issues there? Do you think everything at the end of the day will all just, smooth over?
Well, I think there's a potential for animosity on a number of fronts in the ones you mentioned, player to player, coach to player. I don't think it's a huge deal. And I do think the Browns decision makers, Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry, are really cognizant of this, and they know that J.C. Treader's respected among the team and among the league. I think they're treading lightly because of his role as president of the NFLPA. But I've been on these Zoom calls with J.C. and Demore Smith, NFLPA executive director, and they're trying to walk a line here because there's players with significant money that can be earned in offseason workout bonuses. And they're telling those players, go ahead and show up, right? Like if you're going to lose $500,000, we're not taking a stand on that, right? We're going to show up and make $500 and make your money. but they want the overall sentiment to be, don't feel like you have to go, and let's prove a point. Let's make a stand. Let's show our power as a collective unit. So I think players like JC and other veterans would understand if an undrafted rookie wanted to show up, right? If the Browns decided to practice with a skeleton crew, I think they would understand that, but they wouldn't love it. And I think coaches are just going to have to learn to understand it. And, an overarching thing is, how much real work do you get done in April and May? As long as you're learning in the classroom, do you need the field? And coaches would argue yes, and I would agree to them to some point, but I don't think it's a deal breaker. So all coaches want their guys on the field as much as possible. But talking to the Browns coaches a year ago when this subject came up, almost the first thing out of every coach's mouth was, we respect JC. So I think inside the Browns organization, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, it better be okay. We do not need anything messing up our Super Bowl season.
Yeah, right.
I mean, hey, I cannot wait for you to tell your story. You were telling me you have a great story about the passion of Browns fans when you're on vacation, but we're going to hold off on that. We're going to have all the listeners wait for that. I have one more comment about the subject we're talking about before I get into rookie camp. The Broncos, right? Didn't they release a player that got hurt practicing on his own? And didn't the NFL send a memo to teams saying you don't have to pay if players get injured away?
Yeah, and that's a huge issue. And, yeah, it was one of their offensive linemen, and he had opted out a year ago. So then I think it's like a $10 million contract, carried over to this year. But the way the NFL contracts are written, if you're not working out inside the team facility or at the team facility for practice or even monitored weight training, they can label it a non-football injury. And when that happens, they can void your contract, right? So that's what the Broncos chose to do, and it's left a really bad taste in the union's mouth, in the players' mouth, and I'm sure the union will file lawsuits because the argument is, and JC's made this argument, and I've heard other people from the union say it, the offseason is 29 weeks, and the offseason program is 9 weeks. So players work out the other 20 weeks, right? I mean, give or take, you take a week off for vacation. They're working out. They're playing basketball. Baker's throwing, right? I mean, we've seen it all on social media. It's not like the players only work out for those 9 weeks. So if you're going to have that rule and choose to enforce it, you're really shooting yourself in the foot as an organization because you need your guys to show up in shape. And the only way they can be right, and the only way they can be in shape is if they've worked out all off season or a vast majority of the off season. So I think smart organizations will be really careful if that happened, right? Like, I mean, if Myles Garrett, Browns fans can knock on wood. I just watched video of him playing basketball yesterday. If he comes down and turns an ankle, right, or something worse, whatever, where he's going to miss time, the Browns might be in a position where they could void years off his contract or whatever, the case would be in a given contract. Now, I don't think they would ever do that with Myles Garrett because, he's arguably their best player, right? He's signed to a huge contract. But I think it would just send a bad message if it happened to any player, right? If it was really, truly a working out to stay in shape for football injury and not a, driving a motorcycle, Kellen Winslow II, or skiing, or, you think it's something kind of off the beaten path. If it's really a training, lifting weights, running, touching passes, if you're Jarvis Landry, then I just think it's a terrible precedent for teams to try to penalize guys for that.
My gosh, Scott, go grab some of that overpriced lumber you just bought. Knock on wood with all these injuries you're talking about. The lumber prices are up right now.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's not good. Home improvement right now, buying houses and things like that. Oh my goodness. But
you can tell how handy I am, Dave.
Well, yeah, he's working on a fence right now. But anyway,
there you go.
But yeah, knock on wood for these injury talk. But yeah, no, that you make some really great points there, and it's definitely a situation that will evolve and we'll keep following. Let's move on to rookie camp now, because we actually had rookies on the field a little bit to talk about, and not a lot of action. I think they're just individual drills and some walkthrough, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, they only had 18 guys. So, you can't even go 11 on 11, even if they wanted to. And a lot of that is still a ramification from COVID, that I don't think the league wanted teams bringing in 50 rookies, 40 or 38 of whom wouldn't be around in a week. Because, I'm sure you've been out in rookie minicamp, Dave. It's the 8 guys you drafted. It's the usually you sign, I don't know, 5 or 10 undrafted guys, depending on the number. I think the Browns signed 5 this year, or 4, and then Malik McDowell. And then it's a bunch of tryout guys. Well, I think the league just didn't want a bunch of tryout guys coming in. We're still, getting through the pandemic. So it wound up only being 18 players. And, that meant a lot of individual attention for everybody, really, but especially the top draft picks. But it limited what the Browns could do. I'm not even sure they did any 7-on-7. It was a lot of individual, maybe your defense lines up and, okay, this is where JOK is going to fit. This is where Greg Newsome, the second, is going to fit. But, I'm sure the coaches liked having the guys on the field. You can start installing your system, right? This is the first time these guys can learn the system. You teach them some technique, and it's a way to see guys on the field. And like I said, I was not there. I watched video. I talked to people who were there. Greg Newsome, the second, looked the part. I heard James Hudson was huge, the old lineman that finished at Cincinnati, the tackle that they're going to try to cross-train at guard. And then JOK, part of it might be the number, right? He's wearing 28. And part of it's what we know, that he's a hybrid linebacker. And the Browns are going to use him as the will linebacker and play him in space as much as possible. But he looks like a safety, right? I mean, he's a bigger safety, a little linebacker. Yeah.
That's what stood out. I was looking at video and I looked at him and I'm like, he does not look like a linebacker.
No. And, I think we knew that, right? We knew he was 6'1", 215. But I think when you see him on the field, and especially the picture I'm looking at right now, no pads, he just looks smaller, right? He looks like he could belong in the DB room. And that leads me into talking to his college coach, who's now at Vanderbilt, Clark Leah. And he said, we talk about the falls to 52, right? And did the report about the heart, which, again, he and the Browns said is a non-issue. It's 100%. How much did that affect the fall to 52? How much was it that he's not a scheme fit, right? He's not really a 3-4. He doesn't fit in a 3-4 as a linebacker. So you take those teams out of the equation. And then I'm trying to find this quote. His point is that some teams might be scared away by the fact that he doesn't fit the typical mold, right? Here it is. If you're system driven, you might be kind of turned off, or you might be confused as to how to use the things that make him unique. It's exciting to some and probably discomforting to others. And I think that's a perfect summation of it's exciting for the Browns. They feel like they have the perfect system that he can slide into with Joe Woods, in a will outside linebacker in Joe Woods' system. You can kind of cross-train at safety. You can do a bunch of different things. They want versatility. They want flexibility. But there's some coaches in some schemes that say, hey, if he doesn't look like our linebackers have always looked, that scares us. And I'm not even saying one's right or one's wrong. I just know that I think the Browns have kept an open mind, especially at that position, and they value speed and versatility more than 20 more pounds of muscle, where maybe you can take on a guard a little better. Now, it's not saying Owusu-Koramoah can't take that on, and his coach said he can, and he's physical and he's tough. You just don't want him to do it snap after snap. He's best in space, and that's how the Browns are going to use him.
Let's talk more about Newsome and your thoughts on him after rookie minicamp.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the question is, do you start penciling him in as the starter opposite Denzel Ward? That's where I'm leaning. Now, Andrew Berry, right, the GM, keeps saying it, and he's reinforces it, that you have to have realistic expectations for your rookies. And I think as fans and maybe certain media, we don't, right? We see number 26 pick. We see he should be starting, but everybody has their own learning curve and how long they can adjust, how long it takes them to adjust, and how well you can play right away. Now, the Browns are optimistic for Greg Newsome II, and he's optimistic and he's confident. He's a confident guy. But if Greedy Williams is healthy, and that's a big if, but the signs are pointing in the right direction, then that's a real competition, right? Because Greedy, I know he didn't play last year, but he started 12 games as a rookie in 2019. That's obviously more than Greg Newsome has played in the NFL. So I would give Newsome the edge, but I'm not ready to just say he's going to be the opening day starter. Now, I think the odds are better because of the uncertainty with Greedy's shoulder, but I don't think it's automatic, and I think he's going to have to prove that he's ready. But like I said, when you talk to people that know him, when you listen to him talk, when you just watch his fluidity with which he can backpedal and turn his hips and run and close and make up, if he gets beat on a double move, make up. I like his upside better than Greedy's. And it's just a matter of, okay, week one, is he ready to go, or does he need to be ready to go because Greedy's not? But, having talked to people, having seen what I've seen at minicamp, there's nothing not to like about Greg Newsome II.
So I don't think from a standpoint for fans, when you look at rookie minicamp, anything really stands out to the point of, when the year starts, you could be like, oh, well, it all goes back to rookie minicamp. No. But if it could for the players, you get injured, maybe you have something, you ding something and it kind of sticks with you all summer and it holds you back. I always feel like there's at least one thing, though, from rookie minicamp that when you get to the season, you look back and you're like, yeah, I kind of thought that might happen from what I saw at rookie minicamp. And I know you weren't there, but it's not like even being there, you got to see a ton anyway. Right. But is there anything that stands out from the weekend of rookie minicamp where when the season starts, you're going to be like, yeah, I kind of thought that might happen? Yeah,
that's interesting you say that. And I reflect back real quick. I remember seeing Barkevius Mingo for the first time, right? And he was a number 6 pick in the draft. And he looked so skinny. And, he played the same position as JOK, but it was a different scheme. It was, I think they wanted to play 3-4 outside and rush. And I just remember looking at him across the field house going, man, that guy doesn't look as big as he needs to be. And obviously Mingo kind of flamed out here. He's had he's lasted a long time in the league. Never a big-time player, but big-time special teamer, and has been able to play. But it's interesting how those things kind of become imprinted on your mind. And I remember talking to Phil Savage one time, and he said that they had rookie minicamp, and a guy, and he wouldn't say who the player was, but it was a player they drafted relatively high. And they saw him go through the bags, and they said, oh my gosh, this guy cannot play in the league. So I think coaches are looking at their guys like, okay, is this for real? The stuff we saw on film, does it translate? And I think it's safe to say for the Browns guys, it should, right? I don't think there's a guy that shows up and isn't physically able to handle life in the NFL. Now, Tony Fields II, the linebacker out of West Virginia, didn't practice with a foot injury that he'd hurt prior to minicamp. So, really, I guess the two things that would stand out would be the fact that Fields didn't practice, and you just wonder, Kevin Stefanski said he'll be fine for training camp, but does not being at rookie minicamp, maybe not being able to participate if there are OTAs or mandatory minicamp, how much does that affect, a middle round rookie? And then Anthony Schwartz, the receiver, he dropped multiple passes. There's different, you talk to different reporters that were out there, they had different numbers. But this guy is a guy who is going to have to shed that track label, right? Because he's an Olympic sprinter speed. Can he play receiver? And Gus Malzahn says he can, and says he's only going to get better. And he spends all his time on football. That will help. And he's got the right mindset and he's tough enough. But part of that is, you got to catch the ball, right? And you got to catch the ball at the NFL level. And, I know it wasn't Baker throwing in the ball and they had a couple tryout guys. So maybe that explains some of it. But I think it'll be interesting because the Browns are counting on Schwartz to be able to use his speed and to open things up. Well, you can only do that if he's a threat catching the ball. And again, I don't want to make too much of, 2 or 3 or 4 drops, whatever it was in rookie minicamp. But I think from a bigger picture perspective is how fast can Schwartz develop into the option that they want him to be, the speed option where Kevin Stefanski and Alex Van Pelt can use him in a variety of ways and take advantage of that speed. How quickly can he get up to that speed? Maybe mentally, maybe just as a receiver in general. And I think that'll be something that bears watching when we get to training camp.
Scott, I got 2 more things for you, but before I get to those 2 things, anything else you want to say to wrap up rookie mini camp and from the coaches and people that you have talked to and from this past weekend?
No, you know what? I don't think so. I'll touch on Owusu Koromoa one more time. I posted that story to brownzone.com earlier in the week. Got some decent feedback. So if you haven't seen it yet, take a look at it. I just think Browns fans are going to have to get used to his size. And maybe that's not an issue for some fans. I know it is for some. I've talked to some guys that say, hey, when you take on the Ravens and they're 2 tight ends and 3 tight ends, you need linebackers that are physical enough. But he's not going to get that much bigger, right? Even if he gains 10 pounds, it's still undersized linebacker. I think when we watch him, you just have to view him through a different lens because that's who he is. And remember that that's who the Browns wanted. Now, that doesn't mean it's a great decision. It doesn't mean Joe Woods' scheme is the right scheme. It just means that they knew all of this when they drafted Owusu Koromoa. And I think as observers, we have to keep that in the back of our minds whenever we see him.
All right, 2 more things for you. I want to have a little fun here. I know a couple podcasts ago, I asked you about, covering the Browns and what it's like in the world of Zoom now. And we got into some good stories. And for those that, hang on to the whole podcast and they kind of get rewarded to learn things that, you don't really see because you're not behind the scenes and you are behind the scenes. And I think it'd be fun to share some stuff like this, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And, I don't think anyone's going to feel sorry for you that you cover the Browns because people would love to, see a lot of the behind the scenes, but I don't think people realize how much work you put into it. And this is, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about some stuff that they're not going to normally read from you. And, one of the questions I have is that, I know this from being in the business as well. You have to be ready at all times. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because you scheduled a vacation because you didn't think there was going to be rookie mini camp, right?
Right.
And it's, you can't go and change it. But the bottom line is, you have to be ready at all times. It's a Friday at 5 o'clock and you think you're starting your weekend and the Browns put out the old dump story that ends up, taking up your whole night, and I don't think people realize that. So you talked about talking with other people. Do you, how did beat writers get along with each other is basically what I want to ask you. Is there a rivalry amongst you guys? And I know the answer, but I want, if you don't mind sharing, do you guys all get along? And what's that like? Is there a competition amongst you guys? Because there's a lot of great beat writers, including yourself, obviously, in this town.
Yeah, I get along with everybody, Dave. It's an interesting question. There's certainly competition because you want to break stories if you can. It's really difficult to do that in today's NFL world when the national guys seem to get so many stories, whether it's through agents or teams are just connected, especially when one of the national outlets is NFL Network, who is under the same umbrella as the teams, right? I mean, the paychecks come from the same spots. So that makes it difficult, but there is that element to it. I think there's always the, you look at and you read other people's stories and goes, well, I like my lead better. I like this part of my story better than theirs. Or, if you get a rare interview that somebody else doesn't have, that always feels good. That was easier in the locker room, right? If you got a locker room scoop, it's hard. It was harder to do last year. Maybe we'll get in the locker room again this year would be nice, would be great. So there's that element to it, but I also think that people have their own niches, right? There's some people that are more analysts. There's some people that are more breaking news. I try to find a combination, right? I feel like I rewatch a game and I pick up some things that some people don't, but I'm not one of those guys that breaks down the film all the time. So I think you try to find your place among this beat because there are so many beat writers. There's so many media that cover the Browns on a daily or weekly basis. But I would say, we haven't been in the room together for a year, but the room is pretty friendly. Most people get along. I haven't, I'm sure if I really thought about it, I could come up with some stories of people yelling at each other. I mean, that happens, but I could just tell you 3 of my good friends are on this beat, right? Mary Kay, everybody knows Mary Kay from Cleveland.com, and Nate Ulrich from the Beacon Journal. Like, we text each other all the time, right? We go out to dinner on the road when we travel. We know about each other's kids. Like, we're real tight. And then Tom Withers from AP, plays softball with me. So, I think I think you're able to balance the competitive factor with we're all humans, we're all journalists, right? We're all fighting for the same cause. We all kind of fight for as much access as possible. So there is a balance, but I don't have too many complaints from my, whatever it is, 17 years doing this.
There you go, man. 17 years. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm too old, man.
Oh, man. I'm getting old, too. My goodness. All right. Last thing. You said you had a good story about Browns fans and their passion.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. First, so I'm in South Carolina, Isle of Palms. I go to the first tee, and the starter asks me, where are you from? Cleveland. He goes, 3 groups ago, I had a guy from Cleveland, huge Browns fan. And I had, so it's I can't, I was there for 8 hours or whatever, and I hear about Browns fans. I'm like, okay. So that just, it just struck me how you really can't go anywhere, right, without there being this Browns presence. But I think this is a funnier story. A buddy's buddy during the draft was at the draft in Cleveland, VIP, and whoever he was with offered him the chance to announce one of the draft picks. We saw fans get up there and announce the draft picks. I think it was a 3rd round pick. And he's like, oh my gosh, that'd be great. I could announce the Browns' 3rd round pick. And they're like, oh, it's not the Browns pick. It's the Steelers pick.
Oh,
and the guy refused to do it. And then they said, well, what if it was the Patriots pick? And he said, nope, they're on that list too. So he refused to do it. And I interviewed him. And then at the end, I'm like, hey, are you okay if I write this? And he goes, well, you can't use my name. Well, I can't write it without using his name, but I'm like, it's perfect for the podcast. And it just reminds you of, you think, okay, wouldn't you want to read a draft pick on national television from the first time Cleveland hosted a draft? And the answer would be yes. But I'm telling you, there's got to be a big segment of Browns fans that would either have thought twice or just flat out said, no, I won't do that. And I just thought it was interesting. I thought it was funny. It reminded me one time my parents got me a yellow and black golf bag for Christmas. And everywhere I went, people were giving me crap about it because they thought they were Steelers colors. And it just reminds you, how deep people are into their Browns fandom. And with that comes, the hate of the black and yellow.
It is so true because it's more than just sport or hobby. For a lot of people, it's life. And that's funny. And it kind of reminds me of in the Indians and the World Series with the Cubs, do you sell your tickets? Would you rather have the money or the experience of going to a game? And, that type of thing. I have a funny story for you real quick. So at Channel 3, they bought everyone on air Olympic jackets, and we were supposed to wear them on the air. Guess what color they were? Gold.
Ooh,
like gold medals. But they were gold and black. They looked like the Steelers. They were gold and black. And we got email after email, people complaining, why are you wearing Steelers colors on the air?
Isn't that hysterical? Like, I guess maybe I'm too jaded because I've been in this too long, and I try to, stay neutral, right? And try not to be biased, and I try not to be a fanboy. And I don't think I am, because I've just been in it too long and covered it so much. It's about the stories, and it's about covering it. I mean, I try to cater to the fans, and I know the fans are Browns fans, obviously. But I guess my point is I kind of lose sight of that sometimes, right? That if you said Pittsburgh, I don't have a visceral reaction to Pittsburgh or black and yellow, but there's plenty of people you would run across that would, right, in your daily Northeast Ohio life. And I just think it's funny, and it reminds me, I guess sometimes, who I'm writing for, and exactly how, I keep saying passionate, but how passionate / over the top or obsessed or whatever, plenty of Browns fans are. And I understand it, right?
Absolutely. Go Brownies.
Cool. I think we covered what we needed to cover, Chud. Maybe next week, I don't know. We'll have to see if the Browns had any OTAs. I'm thinking they won't. If they do, we'll go over that. And if not, I thought maybe break down the depth chart, right? There's been so much movement on defense, and I haven't gotten a chance to kind of break it down in a story yet. But that's something maybe we can talk about. And we did a little bit of corner, but just how do we see the Browns lining up? First down, second down, third down. Is it going to be three safeties? Who's here? Who's not? Who, is Mac Wilson on the team? Just some of the things that have changed, since free agency started in March. So thanks a bunch, Chud. We'll hopefully do this again next week. I appreciate the time. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And this has been the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast.